Zhang, Peach Blossom Creek. A wooden bridge hanging in the mist to some obscure, far shore. Beneath a rocky cliff, I asked the fisherman in his boat to tell me. These peach blossom petals, floating endlessly on the current, do they come from that old cave with its clear, flowing water? So, we continue with the 7 quatrains, and this one is written by Zhang. And like He Shishang, he is only represented by one poem in this anthology, and also like He Shishang, chronologically he's an author of the transition between the early Tang period and the High Tang period. That is, second half or late 7th century, first half or early 8th century. So a few biographical details about him. He was born around 675 in Suzhou, and his first post was as district defender in Changshu. Later he served in different other postings, and he was a famous calligrapher, frequently doing his best work when drunk. So he has some anecdotes in the historical literary records about this, and he was famously called Madman Zhang for his unconventional behavior. And he was also part of the group of the 8 immortals of the Wine Cup, and a friend and teacher and patron, among others, of for example, the monk Jinjung, of Li Qi, Gao Shi, Li Bai. And he died around 750. Only 6 of his poems have survived, and this is one of them. So, what's the topic of this poem? On the face of it, it seems to be a quite straightforward landscape poem. It just seems to be describing a scene. So, Zhang is, or his poetic persona, is walking around some place, some natural landscape, which has a river, a small river, a creek, with peach blossoms floating on it. This probably indicates that the season is spring, or late, probably spring. Yeah, late winter, early spring. And he's watching a scene, a very beautiful natural scene. There is a fisherman nearby, and in a boat, and he asks him a question about the sources of the river. But of course, this is very plainly not just referencing a landscape scene. We've already seen poems, and we've already told of the story of the Peach Blossom Creek, as was narrated by Tao Chien during the period of disunion. This is a story that then became a legend about a fisherman that finds, following a creek that is covered with peach blossoms, he finds a cave, enters the cave, and there he finds a sort of peasant utopia, like a community that has been cut off from imperial government for hundreds of years, and where people live prosperous lives with material well-being and without having to pay taxes or serve in the armies. And then he goes away, the peasant, and tries to alert the government, but is not able to find the source back to Peach Blossom Spring. So it's a fictional story, obviously, by Tao Chien with big resonances, and very indicative of the time of hardship and warfare in which Tao Chien was writing, and this desire of creating communities beyond the pale of a sometimes very restrictive and authoritarian imperial government. And later, especially people of the Taoist inclination would latch on to this story, and some might even believe it was true in a way, or that there could be communities like this. Some also started modifying or creating versions of the story where the people who live in the Peach Blossom Spring are immortal, or like transcendent Taoist godlike creatures. So again, this poem has this double bind that is very typical in Chinese poetry, which is landscape poetry is not just about the landscape. Generally, it's landscape and the feelings of the speaker. But here you could add another third layer, which is landscape, the symbolic nature of this landscape, because it's evoking. This might be a real landscape that the poetic persona of Zhang is contemplating with a real fisherman. This could have happened. But the way of addressing it as Peach Blossom Creek and asking that question playfully about an old cave from which the current comes is clearly connecting the episode with the legend that we've just briefly commented again. And then again, there might be, as I said, an implication, which is typical in Chinese landscape poems, of the feelings of the author, which, because of the beauty of the landscape and of the anecdote, probably point towards a desire for retirement, for a quiet life, for the retired life. And it matches also with, we could say, with the biographical information we know of Zhang, who was a person not extremely keen on serving in the administration and rather keen on cultivating aesthetic pursuits and an eccentric lifestyle from the point of view of the stern Confucian moralists. Okay, so let's take a look at the poem couplet by couplet, as we usually do. So, as I said, the title is indicative. Whenever I see something like Peach Blossom Creek, I imagine it's the same characters in Chinese as the title of the short story by Tao Qian. So that already locates us. When I read this title, I immediately thought, okay, so this is another poem describing or summarizing some aspect of the legend of the Peach Blossom Creek. But no, I was surprised by the content. So first couplet. A wooden bridge hanging in the mist to some obscure far shore. Beneath a rocky cliff, I ask the fisherman in his boat to tell me. So the poem, the first couplet sets the scene, and sets the scene by telling what is happening, not exactly where we are, but where we are is some sort of a natural landscape, a hauntingly beautiful one. And we get the two characters that get involved in the conversation. The second couplet will be the question that the poetic persona is asking the fisherman. So I quite like how the landscape is depicted in the poem. It's very evocative, especially the first image in the first line. So you must imagine, a very misty spring, one of these misty days where thick clouds, whitish, greyish, thick strips of mist hardly allow you to see beyond your immediate surroundings. And it's a very poetic, very evocative image of this wooden bridge crossing over to unknown realms, to unknown whereabouts. The bridge seems to be hanging in the mist. So we might imagine, that the beginning and the end of the bridge are invisible. The mist is covering both the beginning and the end, or at least one of the ends, a far shore, which is not visible. So the image is evocative. There is a pathway. There seems to be this pathway, this bridge that leads to some obscure, to some unperceptible realm, which, is really a good symbol, is really a good metaphor for this desire to go into some other place with some other conditions, other rules, a world beyond our world, and which, very quickly connects with the legend of the Peach Blossom Spring, which is precisely that sort of non-space, of other space beyond the realm of everyday toil and hardship and work and responsibility. So there's this bridge floating, which the poetic persona is seeing. It doesn't seem like the poetic persona, though, is on the bridge, because in the second line we get that beneath a rocky cliff. So maybe the poet is on the shore or close to the bridge somewhere, or just seeing the bridge from the shore and under some rocks. Beneath a rocky cliff, I ask the fisherman in his boat to tell me. So he is close to the river, probably immediately adjacent. There's a fisherman going by, and Changshu, or the poetic persona of Changshu, asks a question of the fisherman. What will he ask? What will be the question? And there we go with couplet number 2. These peach blossom petals floating endlessly on the current, do they come from that old cave with its clear, flowing water? So the question clearly connects us with Peach Blossom Spring. I'm not sure if in the context of the question, well, I imagine the question in the context of the poem is meant to be a playful question, because it seems to imply that this river floating here with petals, it's the first time we get the information that there are peach blossoms floating on the river, so there must be peach blossoms surrounding it. But the question feels playful, would the fisherman know that by asking this question, Changshu is asking if this river, this lovely, adorable landscape and river, lead to the peach blossom cave, the place where the immortals dwelled. So whether the fisherman understands the question or not, now the question is, as I said, it has double meaning. It's you can make a literal interpretation of the question, like saying, "Hey, does this river lead to an old cave?" Or maybe he is pointing even to some rocky output and saying, "Does the river come from there?" But at the same time, he's really, playfully, at least for the reader, he's asking if this river with these peach blossoms that seems to match so well the description of the other river by Tao Qian, if this is the same river that leads to that land of possibly immortal beings that live in happiness and beyond the cares and worries of our material world. So, this couplet also has the lovely image of the petals flowing on the water, but I think it's a less evocative image than the one in the first line. It's more conventional, and it ties more with the legend that is being evoked by Chang Shu. So, yeah, not a bad poem. A little bit playful. So this slightly frivolous or playful tone of the poem is interesting. So, yeah, not bad.